welfare is the primary field of social work practice. The term itself has both broad and narrow concept. It is a set of institutions and agencies established by society to provide various kinds of social support to people who may need them. This established either response to society wish to serve or society wish to help individuals to survive. In short, the social welfare is for all people.
Hello everyone, I am Rizamay Baya and we were going to discuss the early beginning of American social welfare. In 1935, a national welfare system had been established for the first time in American history. The American social welfare was founded on the concept of the English Poor Law. What does poor law mean? Poor law is a law that providing for or regulating the public relief or support of the poor. This new poor law was ensured that the poor were housed in workhouses, clothed and fed. Children who entered the workhouse would receive some schooling, but in return to this care, all workhouse paupers would have work for several hours each day, which is considered as replacement in enforcing of poor law. This English poor law, classified as vagant, the involuntary, unemployed, and helpless. If vagants or able-bodied person refused to work, they could be put in jail. Paupers and vagants were regarded as criminals because they believed that choosing not to work and were just lazy, preferring a life of crime. Furthermore, whatever the cause of his distress, the paupers was regarded as a morally deficient person. So, let us proceed in the major development in U.S. private. The development of social work in the United States reflects an ongoing synthesis of ideas derived from many different cultures, such as charity and philanthropy, that have Greek roots that are based on biblical principles. The roots of U.S. social work date back to this period and the efforts of upper-class women and men in church-based and circular charitable organizations to address the consequences of poverty, urbanization, and immigration. These untrained proto-social workers, known as friendly visitors, sought to help poor individuals through moral persuasion and personal example. Organizations such as the Association for the Improvement of the Condition of the Poor and the Children Aid Society began investigating social conditions in areas such as tenement, housing, and child welfare. That's all. Thank you.
Settlement house, a place for working people where their higher moral and intellectual capacity were developed to ensure full participation in a democracy. In 1889, Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr founded Hull House in Chicago, and it was the first settlement house in the U.S. This is Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr. Residents of Settlement House became the champion for social reform, fighting for equal opportunities and abolition of prejudice and discrimination. Basic policy of American social welfare. Basic principle. The individual is primarily responsible for his welfare, but the community should be established a basic measure of security in areas beyond the individual's control. Basic objective. The development, achievement, and happiness of individuals.
Basic ideas that influence social welfare. Protestant ethic. One's life should be a vocation, followed with zealous and disciplined scrupulosity. If a man work hard and invested his income, he is likely to prosper. Wealth represents meritorious achievement in addition to material benefits. First is the Protestant ethic. Max Weber developed this concept, which means that we should work hard and not waste time. We should also repay our loans and debts on time and fairly, and be cautious of our finances. The work ethics refers to an individual's belief of the importance and value of hard work. Work, according to the Protestants, is a responsibility that helps both the individual and society as a whole. The Protestant ethic emphasizes that a person's commitment to the values and embraced by the Protestant faith results in hard work, discipline, and frugality. Frugality means the tendency to acquire goods and services in a restrained manner and resourceful use of already owned economic goods and services to achieve a long-term goal. Laissez-faire of free enterprise is a freedom to invest and trade for men and trade for men, work harder when they work for themselves. The second idea is the laissez-faire. The term laissez-faire means to leave alone when it comes to economic intervention. It is a staple of free market capitalism. The theory suggests that an economy is strongest when the government stays out of the economy entirely, letting market forces behave naturally. Laissez-faire economics is a theory that says the government should not intervene in the economy except to protect individuals' inalienable rights. In other words, let the market do its own thing. If left alone, the laws of supply and demand will efficiently direct the production of goods and services. Supply includes natural resources, capital, and labor, while the demand includes purchases by consumers, businesses, and the government. For example, a homeowner is allowed to plant whatever they want to grow in their front yard without having to get a permission from their city. This is a policy of non-interference by authority in any competitive process. Social Darwinism. Successful competition in the marketplace is inevitably accompanied by hardships and inequities. Only those fit survive the competition or survival of the fittest. Finally, the social Darwinism. Charles Darwin believed that the survival of the fittest is a theory of evolution applied to society, which is based on competition and natural selection. He also believes that no matter what a person's background is, he or she can achieve success through hard work and determination.
Next, we will tackle about the English social welfare in United Kingdom and its religious foundation, early charities, and the Elizabeth Poor Law.
In the Middle Ages, a very diverse patchwork of poor relief had emerged. In the early and high Middle Ages, relief by kin and neighbors was an important part of the safety net. Institutionalized poor relief was principally provided by religious institutions such as monasteries and parish funds. The introduction and formalization of tithing also offered a form of poor relief, since 1/4 to 1/3 of the tithe was theoretically meant for the poor, although it is questionable whether this happened in practice. In ancient and modern Catholic practice, almsgiving is used to support the poor and needy. It is a selfless offer that is expected by most of its members. This almsgiving is associated with both physical needs and emotional needs. In ancient times, people were asked to give money and food to those in need. It was also expected that those of the faith would give of their time and abilities to ensure that their citizens were being taken care of. In the Catholic faith at this time, it was important to use this almsgiving to forget one's own troubles. The almsgiving was used to focus outward, even when it was a burden to do. The Catholics believed that by doing this, they would be storing up treasure in heaven.
In the ordinary troubles, confronting the poor alms must be given from such temporalities only as are superfluous to social requirements. This does not imply an obligation of answering every call, but rather a readiness to give alms according to the dictates of well-regulated charity.
In addition, in year 13th and 14th centuries, helping the poor wasn't only limited in almsgiving and supporting the destitute by the priests of the church and with the help of the church wardens and deacons. For this time, there were non-profit and public services that started to bloom or find its way in the UK, which was referred as charities. They did charitable works and activities which were supplemental act for the existing organized artisan and merchant guilds that seek for mutual aid, brotherhood, and fellowship. So those concerned group of people joined together to help those vulnerable families, individuals, and citizens of the larger society in general.
Elizabethan Poor Law of 1601 remained for a long time the basis of English social welfare. It was a codification of preceding poor relief legislations, starting with the Statute of Laborers in 1349, operated at the time when the population was small enough for everyone to know everyone else. So, people's circumstances would be known and the ideal poor would be unable to claim on the parish poor rate. The Act levied a poor rate on each parish which overseers of the poor were able to collect. The Elizabethan Poor Law is a primary responsibility for the care of the poor belong to the individual's family and relatives. In 1601, Queen Elizabeth proclaimed a set of law designed to maintain order and contribute to the general good of the kingdom. The English Poor Laws. The laws remained the force for more than 250 years with only minor changes. The American colonies and state government modeled their public assistance for the poor on Elizabethan Poor Laws and Law of Settlement and Removal. The law made it possible for local authorities to force individuals and families to leave a town and return to their home parish if they became dependent. The Elizabethan Poor Law is those who could not be supported by relatives had to be cared for by the parish of the local community. In 1601, Queen Elizabeth proclaimed as a set of law designed to maintain order and contribute to the general good of kingdom. Parents were required to support their children and grandchildren. Children whose parents could not support them were forced into mandatory apprenticeship. Most important that laws established the parish. Example, local government. Children whose parents could not support them were forced into mandatory. The Elizabethan Poor Law is also only the poor who were bona fide residents of the parish were eligible for assistance. The Elizabethan Poor Law as codified in 1597-98 were administered through parish overseers that provided relief for the aged, sick, and infant poor, as well as work for the able-bodied in workhouses. Late in 18th century, this was supplemented by the Spenham land system of providing allowance to workers who received wages below what was considered subsistence level. After World War II, social legislation of the 1930s and 40s replaced the poor laws with a comprehensive system of public welfare services. The Elizabethan Poor Law has the parish must maintain the impotent poor voluntarily contribution of the prisoners through collections. The Elizabethan Poor Law was adopted largely in response to a serious deteriorations in economic circumstances
combined with a decline in more traditional forms of charitable assistance. 16th century England experienced rapid inflation caused by rapid population growth. The basement of coinage is 1526 and 1544-46, and the inflow of American silver conditions were especially bad in 1595-98, when forced consecutive poor harvests lead to famine condition. Nominal wages increase at a much slower rate than did prices. Certain poor should be relieved in the workhouses. The able-bodied should either. The Elizabethan Poor Law is a general task levied to provide the poor task and was the main source for the financing of poor relief. Poor relief previews in early modern Europe are often considered to have been characterized by a tax base and relatively secure and generous poor law system in England. In this article, we argue that the spread of agrarian capitalism and coastal reorganization of poor relief. The organization of poor relief could display features considered characteristic of the old poor law. This included relatively high level of spending, strict definition of settlement. There was also a growing preoccupation with the ways in which relief was distributed and the expansion of poor taxes. The Elizabethan Poor Law in England up to the early part of the 20th century, personal failure was considered the main cause of poverty. The more immediate origin of the Elizabethan Poor Law system were deteriorating economic circumstances in 16th century England. Historian George Boyer has stated that England suffered rapid inflation at this time caused by population growth, the basement of coinage, and inflow of American silver. The history of poor law in England and Wales dates that 1536 when legislation was passed to deal with the impotent poor. Poor law legislation can be traced back as far as the codification of late medieval and Tudor era laws in 1587-1598. The new Poor Law, passed in 1834, significantly modified the system of poor relief. The Poor Law system was not formally abolished until 1948. The Poor Law distinguished three classes of poor. Essentially, the laws distinguished three major categories of dependents: the vagrant, the involuntary unemployed, and helpless. Vagrant and any able-bodied person who house of correction of or fine. Able-bodied poor. These were people who were physically able to work and were forced to. To prevent them from becoming vagrant, beggars, vagabonds, it was through many able-bodied poor. Body poor were lazy, ideal, and threatened the established social order. Impotent poor. People unable to work due to age, disability, or other infirmity. Limited relief was provided by the community in which they live. Dependent children. A dependent child is any person aged 0 to 15 in household, whether or not in a family, or a person aged 16 to 18 in full-time education and living in a family with his or her parents or grandparents. It does not include any people aged 16, 18 who have a spouse, partner, or child living in the households.
Social welfare in the Philippines refers to an aggregation of specialized programs, institutions, and services intended to meet the needs of the individuals in the community, such as food, shelter, and clothing. not serviced by other type of sectoral action and receiving some degree of financial support, supervision, or recognition from either the public or private sector or both. The social welfare being observed in the Philippines are the family welfare, child and youth welfare, women's welfare, welfare of disabled person, community welfare, and the emergency assistance. The evolution of social welfare in the Philippines during the prehistoric period. The concept of social welfare started during the prehistoric period. The Filipinos during those times lived in a small scattered communities located at the mouth of rivers and coastal plains. These communities were independent social units called the barangay. From the use of boats, they use boats to move the people from one place to another, which composed of the parents, the children, the relatives, and even the slaves, wherein the concept of the bayanihan and the damayan were manifested during those times. The barangay was also manifested or being ruled by the old member of the community, which is called the datu. The datu has the responsibility to oversee the welfare of every members in the community. Datu also functioned as the arbiter of conflict and leader in times of danger. Social welfare work in those times as centered on mutual protection and economic survival. This caused groups to band together and communities link with each other through the marriage among their members. Social welfare in the Philippines during the Spanish period. Many changes took place in the Philippines, either social and economic life, with the coming of the Spaniards. The Spaniards brought the teaching to do good to others for the salvation of their souls, and which for many years was the underlying philosophy of all social welfare activities. During the Spanish period, religion was the motivating force for charity, wherein there were many forms of charity such as almsgiving, through charitable institution and hospital for the poor, donations of rich individuals, and the subsidy from the government were the primary sources of funding for social welfares. Moreover, more hospitals and orphanages were built during those times. However, it was given to the church and religious associations the responsibility to take care of the poor. On 1565, Don Miguel Lopez de Legazpi established the first hospital in Cebu for the purpose of attending the wounded and the victims of the diseases. Second, the parochial school of law was founded also on 1565 as well. Third, the San Lazaro Hospital on 1578 took care for the indigent beggars and sick natives. And fourth is the Colegio de San Ignacio, who was built on 1589. On 1596, San Juan de Dios Hospital was built. They took care of the indigent and sick Spaniards. And on 1810, Hospicio de San Jose was founded to house the aged and the orphans, the mentally defective, and the young boys requiring reform, but later limiting admission to children who were discharged, later to be adopted or employed. And the seventh is the Ateneo de Manila, who was built on 1859 out of the original charity school called the Obras Diaz, established on 1817. On 1885, Asilo de San Vicente de Paul, an asylum for girls, was established, offering religious instruction, primary education, and training in housework in its inmates. The ninth is the San Isabel, which is the school for indigent girls. And lastly, the San Delitran, school for the indigent boys. Those are the following examples of hospitals, orphanage, and schools established during the Spanish period, wherein the above-mentioned establishments were maintained using the subsidies and grants from the Spanish government. However, these were not sufficient, and donations from philanthropic individuals were also solicited. During the Spanish period, there are two Filipino personalities who contributed to social welfare work during those times. They are Tandang Sora or Melchora Aquino, who took care of the sick and the wounded and fed the soldiers. And the second one is Mrs. Hilaria Aguinaldo, the wife of the first Philippine Republic president. She introduced the concept of the Red Cross.
What's up, what's up? I am Donalyn A. Donaire, and now I will talk about the evolution of social welfare in the Philippines during the American period. Bye-bye! So, let's start. In 1899, the Americans occupied the country and also introducing the new educational system, new health methods, and religious freedom. Next, the 1902. The Insular Board was created by the civil government to coordinate and supervise private institutions engaged in welfare work. People, you should know that the Philippine chapter of the American Red Cross was established on 1905 to take charge of disaster relief in the country and to administer Red Cross funds from the United States. La Gota de Leche. La Gota. It was established in 1907 to furnish child-caring institutions with fresh cow's milk from dairy farm in Pasay, Manila, supervised by a veterinarian. This agency later opened free consultations clinic for mothers. In 1910, a school of deaf and blind was organized. Also, Philippine Anti-Tuberculosis Society was organized following first meeting of the Far Eastern Association of Tropical Medicine of Manila within the encouraging of the research of data collection about tuberculosis and compound the spread of disease. And in 1913, Association de Damas Filipinas was organized by civic-spirited women to help destitute mothers and their children. On February 5, 1915, the American government created the Public Welfare Board with the passage of Legislative Act No. 2510, essentially to coordinate the welfare activities of various existing charitable organizations. So, let's move on. In 1921, Office of the Public Welfare Commissioner was created. It absorbed the functions of the Public Welfare Board which, while charged with coordinating and verifying the activities of child welfare organizations and agencies, was unable to cope with the mounting problems in the health field, which was manifested by the high infant mortality rate in the second decade of the century. And also, Josefa Hara Martinez was obtained a diploma in social work. She worked for the Public Welfare Board, where she started to introduce the scientific approach in social work. In 1924, the Associated Charities had become an independent agency under the supervision of the Public Welfare Commissioner and was partly financed by the government and partly by private contributions. The Philippine Legislative passed a law, the Philippine Legislature Act No. 3203. It is relating to the care and custody of neglected and delinquent children and providing probation officers for them. In 1933, the administration of social welfare in the Philippines was marked by significant developments when Frank Murphy became the Governor-General. Scholarship grants for the professional training in social work in the United States were made available. The legislature appropriated funds for the operations of government child and maternal health centers, which was established in every town with at least 2,000 populations. And for additional information, ang depresyong pang-ekonomiya noong 1930 ay lumikha ng malubhang mga problemang pang-ekonomiya. Hindi nakayanan ng Associated Charities ang bilang ng mga aplikante para sa tulong at iba pang mga serbisyo sa kabila ng mga paglalaan na ginawa ng tanggapan ng Public Welfare Commissioner sa ilalim ng direktor na ito na si Dr. Jose Fabilia. And finally, ang mga programa sa panlipunan ng Murphy administration ay minarkahan sa kauna-unahang pagkakataon na ginampanan ng pamahalaan ang buong responsibilidad para sa kaluwagan ng mga nalulungkot dahil sa anumang dahilan.
Good day, I'm Herlin B. Kimintan. In this video, we talk about the social welfare during the Commonwealth period. Major changes in the Philippines' political and social life took place as a result of the Filipinos taking over the reins of the government during Commonwealth period. Specific sa social welfare in this period, they make more programs and expanded at gina-improvean lang ilang mga services na well-organized. Like the rural charity clinics o sa ubang lugar na wala pa'y hospital, they make programs. O gabuhat po silang program na makahatag og service sa matag balay para sa mentally disabled children. In 1940, the Office of the Commissioner of Health and Public Welfare Office kay sila ang in charge sa health and welfare services. Between 1930 and 1940 was vanished and replaced with the Department of Health and Public Welfare. Former President Manuel L. Quezon, working for social justice, prevailed upon the National Assembly to pass the 8-hour labor law and law fixing minimum wages related to insurance, pension, women, and childhood labor, og iya pong gi-initiate ang housing projects na mapalitra sa mga tenants in easy installment plans. He also created relief boards and other bodies to undertake relief activity during the period of natural calamities, economic crisis, and unemployment. In 1941, Executive Order established ang Bureau of Public Assistance Services na ilang i-take over ang mga activities na dapat gibuhat sa Associated Charities. By then, it ceased to exist. And now, we're going to talk about the evolution of social welfare during Japanese period. The Second World War, which brought death and immeasurable suffering to the country, speculations was last for 2 years. In 1943, kinashirt na og pagkaundariya na year, the Bureau had to cease Operation Relief Works during the Japanese period was undertaken primarily by the volunteer organization ug ang mga volunteer kay ang Philippine Red Cross, Christian Association ug ang National Federation of Women's League. Despite of the difficulties, ang uban ng ospital sa Manila, gapadayon gyapon sila og tamba sa mga tao, gaprovide sila og food ug shelter ug money ng mga ospital. Philippine General Hospital, St. Luke's Hospital, Mary Johnston Hospital, and the North General Hospital. O ang uban po ng mga simbahan, gigamit po Centers of Operation, kauban ang mga religious member o uban volunteer. Ang mga social welfare ani na period, kay gahatag sila og medical care, treatment o pagkaon. pati sanina sa mga samar na sundalo, sa mga pinrisog mga sibilyan. After the liberation relief work continued to play an important role, the workers of the Philippine War Incorporated, organized in the United States by a group of Americans, accompanied the Liberating Army when it landed in late 1945 and assisted the United States Army in the provision of medical services and material relief to prisoners of war and displaced persons. Ang uban na relief agencies na active kay sa pag-distribute og mga goods sa mga war victims kay ang Emergencies Relief Office, Emergencies Commission Administration, Philippine Civil Affairs Unit, Philippine Relief and Trade Rehabilitation Administration, also known as PRATRA, United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. That's all. Thank you.